This happened a few years ago when we lived in the city. My wife and I had a place in a large building downtown. It was one of those ultra-modern places with floor-to-ceiling windows and Wi-Fi built into all of the appliances. There were many other large buildings in the area, and they were all very close together. Because of that, you could see right into several other people's places if you were looking out the window. It was kind of a creepy thing to be at home and look out the window to see a clear view of many other people just living their lives. It will come as no surprise that I like to keep the curtains closed as much as possible. We had a lot of houseplants, though, so we needed to keep them open sometimes. There wasn't a lot of direct sunlight, but it was enough to keep the plants alive for the most part. After we had been there for a while, we started to get used to it, so we started leaving the curtains open more. It felt kind of claustrophobic with them closed. Anyway, we went about our lives for a while, and nothing much happened. One day, however, my wife came home one evening in an absolute fit. She was crying and rambling incoherently. She ran over to the window and yanked the curtain shut in a rage. I tried to calm her down, but it was absolutely futile. I could hardly understand a word she was saying. The only thing I could make out was that she keeps saying that we needed to move. I asked her why, but she just kept saying the same things over again. After a few minutes, she had settled down enough to explain what had happened. She told me that she had gotten an anonymous email with a link to a website where someone had been uploading hours and hours of video of us at home taken through the windows. I wanted to see it, but she was reluctant. She didn't want to look again, but I had to know for sure. We turned on my laptop and opened the page. To my horror, she was right. One of our neighbors had been filming us at home for months. There were countless hours of us just sitting at home watching TV, making dinner, and everything else you can imagine. I slammed the laptop closed after a few minutes, then walked over to the window. I peeked through the curtains and looked over to the next building. It was not obvious from the video I'd seen exactly where the camera was placed, but I had managed to narrow it down to a section of 3 or 4 apartments. Suddenly I saw at the glint of a camera lens from one of our neighbor's windows. That was it. The camera was there. Now that we knew where it was, I called the police. We went to the station and filed a report on the incident, but it was of little use. The police did nothing more than tell us to keep our curtains closed. I was baffled that it didn't break the law somehow, especially because we knew who it was. I should mention that my wife is actually a public figure of sorts. I won't get too specific, but she's a politician for the municipal government where we live. Not a huge celebrity or anything, but she does get recognized from time to time. I figure she was targeted because that creek recognized her. Needless to say, we moved out of that place as soon as possible. This happened in Florida somewhere between 2004 and 2006. I was around 7 years old at the time, and my sister was a few years older than me. I'm a French American and I grew up overseas, so visiting my grandmother's parents in America has always been an interesting experience. They had a neighbor who was a very old skinny man from what I can remember, and he had a wife. We never saw her much. We would sometimes see her trimming the hedges and occasionally staring at my sister while we ran around in the backyard. My grandparents used to live in a different house that was only a few houses down from their current place. I remember having left a few toys in the old house, and I always wanted to go back and get them, but I never did. I remember on several occasions the old man would try to coax me and my older sister into his house. Sometimes he would try it with us separately, and other times he would try to get us while we were together. I was just a little kid back then, but I do remember certain things in detail. There was one encounter with our neighbor that I'll never forget. One time I was playing out in the backyard looking for lizards at a typical Florida pastime when I saw the neighbor waving at me. I remember watching him for a bit before trotting over to him. He seemed to be signaling to me to come into his garage right before I did so. My older sister appeared behind me and grabbed my hand. She told me off for almost going onto our neighbor's property. When I told her what happened, I remember she looked over at him. The old man began to say things like, "Your dog is in my garage. She wandered in here, come get her." I'll give you some candy and stuff like that. After a few minutes of that, I had grown bored and I just sat down on the grass. I remember my older sister leaning down a bit to speak into my ear, and she said something like this: when I say so, we run. Got it? I just nodded in return, wondering why we would need to run. As my older sister stared the man down, he soon began to start walking out of his garage. The man began to talk about Candy, our dog, and other things as he approached us. I remember looking at him in a confused manner as he got closer. Seeing this, my sister whispered now to me, and we both got up and began to run back to the house. The man was screaming at us to come back. Once we ran inside, my older sister told my parents what happened, and they confirmed that we should never talk to the man again. Also, the dog was in the house the entire time. She was fine back then. I thought it was just a weird encounter and I tossed it aside. I didn't understand the severity until much later. Several times after that, I remember the neighbor trying to get me to follow him into his house. One time I had gone looking for golf balls and I wandered too close to his house. This would always end with me tempting death and waiting till he was a few seconds away from grabbing me before I darted back to my house. Either that or my older sister would come to rescue me when I was around 9 years old. In 2008, the man died. From what? I don't remember, but I think it had something to do with his heart. To be honest, at the time I didn't care at all. I was happy he was gone so my older sister and I wouldn't get creeped on anymore. Now that I think about it all these years later, it was very creepy. But at the time I didn't think much of it since I was so young. What I wonder about now is why he wanted my older sister and I had to come into his house. Why did he lie about the dog and what was he planning to do with us? At the time that this happened, I was around 12 years old and I lived in a quiet suburb in South Carolina. I used to spend hours just walking my dog around the neighborhood because there wasn't much else to do back then. We had a 70-pound basset hound named Rufus who looked kind of like a sawed-off St. Bernard. I was walking him around late in the afternoon in the fall and it started to get dark. I was on the other end of the neighborhood from where my house was when I first saw a beat-up, rusty red pickup truck just driving around. I didn't think a whole lot of it because it was the South, so pickup trucks were all over the place and it didn't automatically mean anything. But as I was walking home, I saw the truck turn down a street. Then it came out the other end, further down, and went back the way I came from to give you an idea of the neighborhood. It wasn't set up like regular blocks, more like a main road than a bunch of roads that all looped around and came back to the main one. At first I just figured the guy was lost or something, and I didn't think much of it. However, as I was getting closer to my house and it was getting darker, I saw the truck again. Another thing about my neighborhood is that even though there are a lot of houses, everyone pretty much kept to themselves. Therefore, there wasn't really anyone outside at this time of night, even though it was still fairly early. I continued walking down the road to my house, and then I saw the truck again, this time just parked on the side facing the road I came out of. I then turned onto the road that my house was on and it started moving, driving slowly behind me with the lights out. If you know anything about basset hounds, they're not exactly the most threatening type of dog. They're short and stubby, like a big dachshund with big ears and goofy faces. So even though Rufus was a big dog, he wasn't great for protection. They also don't walk very fast and tend to trip over their ears when they run. So I was stuck with him setting the pace. With Rufus weighing almost as much as I did, it was not like I could just pick him up and then start running either. There I was, walking down the dark road in a quiet neighborhood with my slow dog and the creepy truck behind me. I knew I couldn't really run from it, and I doubted that anyone would hear if I screamed. Finally, I came up with a plan, even if it was a stupid one. When I got to one of the handful of lamp posts on the street, I stopped and turned around and I just stared at the truck. It stopped moving and just sat there about 30 feet away from me. It was as if he was trying to look like he was parked or something. I stood there and stared at that truck for what felt like forever, but it was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Finally, after a while, the truck started moving again. It turned its lights on and then turned off down another road. Then I booked it into someone's backyard and went the rest of my way home from there. I never told my mom about that creepy truck because I knew she'd freak out and probably wouldn't let me take the dogs out alone anymore.